Welcome to Trash Talk Reverse. I'm Harry, and today we're going to be watching Season 2, Episode 5 of Game of Thrones. Last episode set up a lot to come going forward, like Arya working for Tywin, Lannister shenanigans, and of course Renly's death is probably in the beginning of this episode. I expect to be back with Jon Snow at the wall, and maybe also see what Theon's up to, but they also have Dany's storyline to tackle, so maybe not all three of those things will be in this episode, given that we also need to be in King's Landing and check in with Catelyn and Stannis and the crew. So let's see exactly what this episode has in store.
My son has no interest in the Iron Throne.
Your son can go on calling himself king in the north. The Starks will have dominion over all lands north of Catelyn, provided he swears me an oath of fealty. The same Ned Stark swore to Robert 18 years ago. In the morning, I'll destroy my brother's army. When that's done, Baratheon and Stark will fight their common enemy together.
I am begging you to reconsider this battle. Negotiate a peace with your brothers.
Negotiate with Stannis.
Like I was saying in the last episode, Renly versus Stannis should have come later on in the season. Because it's not like they need to get Stannis out of the way in order to get to Joffrey. It's more like nobody's taking Stannis seriously, and it's supposed to be between Robb and Renly versus the Lannisters, and then Stannis comes into the mix as a force to be reckoned with that nobody saw coming. Again, it's hard to really talk about this since I don't have the full big picture understanding yet. I'll have to see how the rest of the season plays out, but right now, given the fact that they're going to battle with each other, just feels weird.
No! You'll die for this!
No, wait, it wasn't.
How did they know to come in? Brienne screaming no? That wasn't that loud. And those two sounded like they were running from quite a distance away. And you're not even gonna take 1 second to stop and see what Lady Catelyn has to say? Everything about this just feels so ludicrous. The shadow baby, the guys running in like, oh, you'll pay for this. Like, the only thing that made sense in this scene was Catelyn being like, what the hell is going on? Yeah, that was just absolutely ridiculous. And again, this scene alone introduced another potential aspect of the story that has now immediately been chopped off. Renly was just telling Catelyn he wanted Robb to pledge his loyalty to Renly the way Ned had pledged his loyalty to Robert. That would have been an interesting conflict because we know Robb doesn't want to answer to the South anymore. He wants to help seat Renly on the throne in place of Joffrey because he doesn't think Joffrey's a good ruler, and he wants the North to be separate from the South. So Renly's attitude seems to put a dent in Robb's plan. So instead of getting to explore that potential and the politics of their alliance, the writers just chop that off. Renly's death being right here, right now, in the manner that it happened, just crushes so much potential in the storylines of this season so far. And that's why it's so disappointing that this is happening now instead of several episodes down the line.
Queen of Qarth murdered Renly.
I don't believe that. You don't believe that.
Stannis,
I will put a sword through his righteous face.
you'll be cut to pieces before he sets foot on solid ground. If it is justice that you want, be smart about it.
You can't avenge him from the grave.
And he doesn't even avenge him because their storyline then goes off in a completely different direction. Marjorie ends up with Joffrey. I don't remember what even happens to Loras until they get blown up by Cersei at the end of season 6. If I remember correctly, it was Brienne that killed Stannis in season 5, right? So at least she got her justice. Also, Catelyn rushed out of there so fast with Brienne. Like, I know for her to say, oh, it was a magical demon thing would sound really weird and sketchy, but what reason would anyone have to believe that Catelyn was somehow involved? Because when the dudes came in, they went right for Brienne. They didn't even apprehend Catelyn. So clearly they were not suspicious of Catelyn being involved. So then why would the people out there think that Catelyn Stark personally murdered or enlisted Brienne of Tarth to murder Renly when she literally came here to get Renly's support, which Renly publicly gave her? And since she ran away with Brienne, we have to assume that the writers are suggesting that Catelyn believed that she would look culpable in the situation. So none of this really adds up. Also, they couldn't find a way to write in Catelyn at least trying to tell at least somebody that this had happened, like the Tyrells, so that they don't think it's Brienne. Maybe she thinks that they won't believe her because what she saw is crazy, but then why would those people think that Catelyn had a reason to protect Brienne if she killed Renly, who Catelyn's son was seeking an alliance with? Like, it just doesn't make sense. I think the writers just wanted to skip the hard part and have them make a hasty exit.
Most seem to implicate Catelyn Stark in some way. Some say it was one of his own King's Guard, while still others say it was Stannis himself who did it after negotiations went sour. He says Renly's army's flocking to support Stannis, which would give Stannis superiority over us on both land and sea.
He said some sources implicate Catelyn Stark. Like, that's crazy. But regardless, even if it was in Catelyn's best interest to get Brienne and get out of there, all of that could have been avoided if Renly died later on in the season. This feels like a forceful disruption in the storyline, and obviously it's trickling down as it should, but this scene right here with Tyrion just telling Cersei what's going on kind of minimizes the impact of Renly's death. Like, now we're just told that Renly's men are flocking to Stannis Baratheon, so that just feels like they orchestrated Catelyn and Brienne being in the room with Renly and then subsequently running away without even trying to explain things, so that Renly's men would have no option but to turn to Stannis so that they could set up for Stannis versus the Lannisters at the Battle of Blackwater. And I don't like it when things take so much writer manipulation to come about. If the story wasn't organically heading in that direction, then don't head in that direction. You can still have Blackwater and still have it be the Lannisters winning due to Tyrion's expertise without all these puppet strings. Also, we're 8 minutes into the episode and we're being told by Littlefinger and the Tyrells and by Tyrion's conversation with Cersei about the fallout of the situation rather than actually seeing the fallout of the the situation.
If the vile allegations against my brother and sister are true, do you think it'll make Jaime more likely to kill you or less likely? When I tell him you're fucking her,
Tyrion said that so casually, like you don't even care that your siblings have been doing this and that this resulted in Joffrey and Myrcella and Tommen. Like you don't even care that that could be a real thing. Because earlier he used it to tease Cersei and it seemed like he didn't believe it. Now he's like, if this was true, Jaime would kill you. And though you could say that he's using this to threaten Lancel, just the fact that he knows about Cersei and Lancel makes it more likely for him to then think Jaime and Cersei was real. So I just find it weird that they're having Tyrion talk about this so casually and not even addressing how weird that would be for him. Like, are we going to have a conversation with him and Cersei later on down the line where he's like, so you and Jaime are real, and talk about that?
All my brother's bannermen have come to my side, except the Tyrells who fled like cowards.
I would rather have found out about Renly's bannermen flocking to Stannis from him and not from Tyrion. The scene with Tyrion and Cersei and the scene with Tyrion and Lancel should have come after this scene.
I never thought I'd have reason to doubt your loyalty. Was I wrong?
You won those bannermen from Renly. Don't lose them to her.
We set out for King's Landing without Lady Melisandre. Then you lead the fleet into Blackwater Bay.
Framing Stannis' story through Davos's eyes makes his story a lot more tolerable to watch. So that was a good decision. And now we're back with Tyrion and Bran. So again, if they had done Stannis right after the Tyrells, which would have made logical sense because he talked about them fleeing, then we would have had Tyrion with Cersei, Tyrion with Lancel and Bran, and then cutting to this scene, it just would have flowed a lot better.
Brother fornicates with sister in the bed of kings. Only a surprise when the fruit of the incest is rotten.
Not after what you did to your birthday present.
King is a lost cause.
Glad to see that the public is now showing some outrage. But again, no reaction from Tyrion. Like, does he really just not care? And again, the way he's talking about Joffrey right now, so nonchalant. Like, we should have had him find out about that and realize the king is a lost cause, rather than having him passively say this to Bronn. They still could have had this scene, but it just feels like in this episode, they're fast forwarding through a bunch of really important stuff that we're just not getting to see and we're not getting to build out. If Renly's death had been pushed back several episodes, then we could have had time to build out all of these things that's now just being fast forwarded through.
And I will hunt you down, drag you back here in chains, and hang you for a traitor.
We yield! My crew will wait on deck for a year if I ask them to.
They're not going to respect you until you prove yourself.
Stony Shore's not far from Torrance Square. As soon as Winterfell got word we'd taken Torrance Square, the Starks would send their men to take it back. Take me to my ship.
I understand Theon's thought process of wanting to prove himself, but is he not going to struggle with the fact that taking over Winterfell means betraying Robb? I hope that's something we see him struggle with later on, because that scene right there, when they ended on the implication that they were going to go after Winterfell, he looked pleased about it. Like, this is my opportunity to prove myself in a big way, rather than, oh crap, that's where my best friend was in charge.
Where are you from?
Maidenpool.
And what is their sigil? A red salmon. I think a Maidenpool girl would remember that. You're a northerner, aren't you? Good. And what do they say of Robb Stark in the north?
They call him the young wolf. They say he can turn into a wolf himself when he wants. They say he can't be killed.
And do you believe them?
No, my lord, anyone can be killed.
Great choice to cut to a close-up when she said that. Also, that dialogue right there, her saying anyone can be killed. There's like a little triple meaning there, isn't there? Because she saw her own father die, so she knows he could be killed. We know Robb's gonna die in the next season, so this is like a little, maybe not a direct foreshadowing, but the implication that Robb Stark may not necessarily be safe. And then the triple one is her, in her mind, thinking Tywin Lannister can be killed. So that was a really good scene.
The Red God takes what is his, and only death may pay for life. You saved me and the two I was with. You stole 3 deaths from the Red God. We have to give them back. Speak 3 names, and the man will do the rest.
The one who tortures everyone.
A man needs a name.
They call him the Tickler.
Really interesting setup right there. Him saying that death has to pay for life is the same thing that Midi Mazdur said last season. And back then I had talked about Jon Snow coming back in season 6 after he was killed. And I said I was pretty sure that him coming back to life didn't cost anything. I can't remember, honestly, how all that went down. So I'll have to keep that in mind when we get to that season. But I also wanted to talk about the fact that we meet Jack and Hagar in this season. Then they don't meet up again until season 5. Like, what were they doing with Arya's storyline? I really can't remember what happens. I know that she ends up with the Hound. I'm assuming in season 4, because I remember that Brienne comes in and fights the Hound, and then she thinks that he dies, and then she heads off to the east. I have no idea what Arya gets up to in the 3rd season. So her storyline is something that I'm going to be tracking to see if they dragged it out until she was older to take her to Jack and Hagar in the east, or if it felt organic that she was sidelined for 2 more years before getting there. And final thing, we're seeing some seeds of world building in the east, religions and customs and things like that, and that's interesting, but I want to see where that goes. What else are they going to do with that? Because the eastern stuff in this story seems to be so separate from everything that goes on in Westeros, and so far seems to exist only to drag out Daenerys and Arya storylines. But again, that's something I'll have to keep an eye on going forward.
3 for White Walkers. That's the only time they blow the horn 3 times.
It's been 1,000 years, how do you know?
Well,
I read it in a book.
Literally Hermione Granger, but natural bonding between this group.
It's Corin Arfan.
You can tell from John's face that he's very interested to finally get to know this guy that he's been hearing his uncle talk about.
Enough to burn Stannis Baratheon's fleet and armies both.
You won't be making wildfire for my sister any longer.
You'll be making it for me.
You'll be making it for me.
Boom. I love it when I'm able to predict a line. There have been a few instances in this show where I've been able to predict a line, and the same goes for other shows and movies. And I know that some people think predictability is bad, including in dialogue, but I think it's fun. Everything comes down to execution. If the dialogue is predictable, predictable because it's contrived, then that's not well done. But these types of moments are always great. Just because the way the dialogue is set up, you're able to guess what they're going to say, and then they say it, and you're like, hell yeah, get him.
He loves you. You would look like a real princess in Zara.
She's not a princess, she's a Khaleesi. You should wear it, Khaleesi. You are the guest. It would be rude not to.
I don't like the way they're sewing this conflict between the two girls. That has never been an issue until this season, and it feels manufactured, especially knowing that Doria ends up betraying Dany by supporting Zaro what's-his-face. It's just not very well written. The scene itself on a micro level was fine, like the dialogue and the flow. This would have been fine on its own. It's just the fact that they're forcing Dany's two right-hand women to fight each other and be jealous of each other and essentially fight for Dany's approval just doesn't feel organic at all.
My brother used to say the only thing the Dothraki knew how to do was steal things better men have built.
They're quite good at killing the better men.
That's what kind of queen I'm going to be.
Again, we have this whole the Dothraki are savage and they don't know how to exist in a civilized society. Like, obviously groups like the Dothraki that are more nomadic can exist, but since they're the only ones, they're being talked about like the only thing they know how to do is steal. It just really rubs you the wrong way. Again, it's the framing of the culture in the setting of the show. They could have done a much better job, and especially with Dany being like, that's not the kind of queen I'm gonna be. That really seals the deal with how problematic the representation is. If you know anything about history, you'll know that there are so many examples in which Western colonizers justify their exploits by making people of color in the East look bad. Like, I'm sure y'all have heard about, oh, we're gonna save them, we're gonna educate them, we're gonna make them civilized. That's what it's giving right now in this show. And I've had people bring up, oh, people of color can do bad things. Like, it's not about that though. It's about the way you frame the narrative. There are ways to frame a narrative that don't suggest that the culture is the issue. If this show had Vikings as a non-POC contrast to Dothraki that were also burning people's houses and doing terrible things to the women, then it wouldn't feel like people of color equal bad culture. It would just feel like these are two similar cultures within the wider scope of the world that have practices that most other cultures of various races would not agree with. And I see this problem a lot. People automatically want to jump down your throat when you even bring up the possibility that a representation might not be well executed or appropriately done or might even be problematic. I want to ask you guys to start thinking critically about the way people of color are depicted in these stories, learn more about Hollywood's history with representation and depictions of people of color, and then you can join the conversation instead of just jumping down people's throats, telling them that they have no reason to be concerned when they see portrayals like this.
Renly's enemies are Rob's enemies as well.
But I could serve you. You have courage. Not battle courage, perhaps, but I don't know, a woman's kind of courage. Promise me that you will not hold me back from Stannis.
Too bad she won't be around.
I will shield your back and give my life for yours if it comes to that.
I vow that you shall always have a place in my home, and that I shall ask no service of you that might bring you dishonor.
This is crazy, because they spent some time developing the relationship between Brienne and Catelyn and developing some potential for what's to come, but then she's just gonna send Brienne off with Jaime this season, right? If I remember correctly. So the only time that this conversation has any sort of meaning at all is when Brienne fights the Hound to protect Arya. Again, I said this last season, but why does this show just not follow through with the things that it sets up? Like, why do you establish a relationship and then just have them divert paths for the rest of the show? That doesn't make sense to me. Again, I'll see how things play out in the coming episodes, but it's just really frustrating.
What does it mean? You never heard of a three-eyed wedding?
Does not mean anything then.
You're lying.
You might be a little old, but don't you call me a liar.
You know what it means?
I never said I didn't.
You didn't give me an honest answer.
It's not the same as being a liar. In the Godswood, you told me you didn't dream. Now who's a liar? What did you see in your dream?
I dreamt that the sea came to Winterfell. Saw waves crashing against the gates. Drowned when we're floating here. So Roderick was one of them.
Again, that's why I think they had no reason to have that dialogue in the first episode about, you're having dreams, oh, I don't dream. And now here again, you're having dreams, which makes you a liar. Like, we don't need that. And not only do we not need it, but it actively hurts the scene because it just feels unnatural. I was talking about this when watching episode 3. Sometimes you'll notice problems like this in a scene and you have to decide, is this affecting your experience of the scene or is it completely fine? And while in that episode, some of the slight issues I brought up did not affect my experience at all and everything was completely fine, it's the opposite here, because even a little dialogue scene like that prior to him describing the dream is jarring because it feels badly written.
They say all sorts of crazy things north of the wall.
She said north of the wall, and now we cut to north of the wall. Though something about that transition did feel a bit jarring because the sound design and the edit didn't quite line up, but it's not affecting my experience of the scene.
You want to conquer the 7 kingdoms for the Dothraki?
I want them because they're mine by right.
A conqueror.
And how did you get all of this? Did someone give it to you?
No, I come from nothing.
So you wanted more than you had and you took it. And behind the door?
More than enough to buy horses, ships, armies. Enough to go home.
All I have to do
Is marry me. My mother and father never owned a pair of shoes, but marry me and I will give you the 7 kingdoms.
See, this guy having this backstory and being a person of color and eventually betraying Dany is not inherently the problem. Like I've been saying this season, content and context both are really important. The same applies to characterizations of people of color. Content and context for this guy works, it doesn't for the Dothraki. And we'll see about the other groups going forward, but this is just something to keep in mind.
Starks fight the Lannisters and Baratheons fight each other.
They'll give you ships and soldiers and they'll own you forever. I know the opportunity before you seems like the last you ever had, but you must
You're not speaking like I'm a child.
Make
cover it up and deny it, but you have a gentle heart. You would not only be respected and feared, you would be loved.
So what would you have me do as my advisor?
Make your own way. Find your own ship. You only need one. The allies we need are in Westeros.
And how do I get this ship?
I'll find it for you.
I guess the writers had to screw this up because Dany getting the ship, showing up in Westeros, gathering allies, it would have only taken 1 to 2 more seasons before she took over. That was the end of the episode? That did not feel like an ending scene. That was really random, but okay. It was a good scene, it just didn't feel like an ending. Anyway, I really wasn't too big of a fan of this episode. The last 4 episodes were mostly really strong, and the writing in this one just seemed to fall flat in comparison, though we still did have some great scenes, especially Arya's storyline and Tyrion's scenes as usual, but a couple others just weren't up to that standard. If Theon's attack of Winterfell is in the next episode, then I really hope they at least show him struggle with betraying Robb, but it's already a problem that he didn't struggle with the thought when the opportunity first presented itself, when he was talking with that one guy. We also had Renly's death, which again feels like wasted potential, and I think actually seeing it play out proves to me that they just wanted to fast forward through a storyline that had the potential for further development because they wanted to do other stuff. As I mentioned, they even set up a whole potential conflict between Robb and Renly, and then they just stifled that all together in the same scene. They've also set up a new supportive relationship between Catelyn and Brienne, and to the best of my memory, that's not something that'll develop further because Catelyn will send Jaime with Brienne, and they'll never see each other again. Also, Jaime's barely in these episodes. Like, my memory of him in this show was that he had much more of a presence. Like, I really thought his ordeal with losing the hand and everything would be happening earlier than I assume it actually does, but that was back when I thought Renly's death was in like the 2nd or 3rd episode of the season. Robb's barely in these episodes as well, like he was in episode 1 and then he popped in for like 1 scene since then, I think. Since this is a rewatch, I do have some idea of big picture stuff, but since it's been such a long time and I barely remember seasons 2 through 7, some of that big picture stuff will become a lot clearer later on, and maybe even shift my perspective. Like the Catelyn, Robb, Jaime stuff, it'll take longer to see how that stuff is developing and if it's done well. And Dany's full storyline across all the seasons is one that, in my memory, felt really dragged out. So as I'm watching this season, I'm trying to see how it works as part of her full story arc and her character development. One thing that really seems wild to me rewatching this is the fact that Cersei ends up becoming the main villain of the show. Like, you never would have thought, given that all her scenes this season have been written and filmed through Tyrion's perspective, except I think the ones with Sansa and Joffrey, which were through her perspective. So I'll have to pay attention to that as well, because at this point, none of the Lannisters truly seem like villains, not even Joffrey so much, except on a really small scale. And speaking of, we probably should have gotten a scene with Cersei and Tyrion talking about Joffrey, because last episode they made a big deal about Joffrey sticking it to his uncle. In this episode, it was vaguely mentioned by Bronn and immediately waved aside by Tyrion, which I really didn't like. They're just fast forwarding through stuff that deserves more screen time and development, which is the reverse of what they did last season, where they gave way too much screen time to stuff that wasn't necessary. Still, this episode overall was written better than probably all of last season, and now we're halfway through season 2. So with that, I will see you in the next one.